This is a true story, and it's happening everywhere. It's a Friday afternoon, about 4:30. Your boss has his feet up, just relaxing, whereas you're just working your heart out, and so is everyone else in the office, apart from the boss. Now, you have dinner plans. Everyone has plans. But most weeks, you don't actually get the work done. So no one is really surprised when, at about 4:45, the boss comes out, and it's just like that boss from Office Space. He walks up to you, he goes, "Yeah, corporate isn't happy with these numbers. I'm gonna have to get you to stay back a bit." And everyone reacts with silence, except the newest worker. He was this entry-level person. At exactly 5 o'clock, she takes her coat, she leaves. And you envy her, even though she may have just made herself unemployed. You wish you could do that. So on Monday, the boss calls her into his office. He sits her down and he says, "Look, your performance lately has been a little bit subpar, and we're a family here. We all have to go the extra mile. We have to put in a little bit more. So if you leave on the dot again, well, I can't promise you that your job's going to be around longer. There are layoffs everywhere. This is a difficult time for business, and we need to look after ourselves and each other." And the new worker says, "Sure, I'm happy to put in a little extra. If there's extra compensation, I do want to be rewarded for my time. That's how work works, isn't it?" What you've just seen is called quiet quitting. Quiet quitting is an unusual term. It sprang up on internet protest communities as a way of defying the new order of work, which is where everyone puts in more and more and more and receives less and less and less. Most prominently, the Reddit community r/Antiwork promotes quiet quitting, or as they like to call it, acting your wage. The idea is to do the bare minimum while still keeping your job. Now, my focus isn't necessarily on what quiet quitting is, but rather what the media will tell you quiet quitting is, what they would like you to believe it is, and how it came to be that way. Because right now there is a very prominent front-center propaganda battle going on between a bunch of workers. It's as if we have this wider union of just everyone at once on the internet, in communities like Antiwork or Work Reform, which was set up when they realized that calling a community anti-work and just deciding that you don't want to work at all, or indeed being seen that way even though you're actually looking for work, is a little bit of a problem and may set you back a little bit. On the other side, we have the bosses, the people who are saying that no one wants to work anymore, that they're all snowflakes, blah, 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 you've heard it all. Now, if it were up to me, I would say that the workers have won the propaganda battle purely because they have the most amazing songs and the most amazing propaganda, but that's pure wordsmithing. They just make me laugh a lot.
Well, my boss makes $1 and I make a dime. That's why I poop on company time.
But it's not necessarily a popularity contest, it's a message contest. It's a contest to see who can make the most people believe their side, rather than want their side to be true. And the bosses are going to win that. Let me explain why. History is written by the people who are most able to get their message out there, which is usually the victors, but in our day and age, it's the media. Now, the media listen to the side of an argument who have their attention the most often, which is often their social networks, rather than, say, contacts they've gone out and made, rather than people they're meant to be listening to. After all, we're a community of human beings, and we can only really feel ourselves close to about 15 people. We can only really consider about 100 people friends, even though you may have thousands and thousands on Facebook. And this really interesting thing happens now and then, where the side that did not come up with the term pitches it to the media the most often. This has happened with some really prominent examples, such as Prime Minister. Now, originally this was an insult, saying, "Oh, this person who's advising the king wants to be more popular, wants to be more powerful than all the others." Another good example is suffragette, which is kind of like calling someone a professoress. It's kind of like calling someone a chairwoman as prominently as possible, to kind of demean them. But the women who wanted equal voting rights took up the phrase and ran with it quite successfully, because the media listened to them, because the media associated the word suffragette with the messages they wanted out there. Another one is political correctness. It was always meant to sound a little bit 1984, a little bit totalitarian, and the political right fell for this when they heard the left using it as a kind of parody. This is called reappropriation, or taking it back. So now that you're caught up, I want to show you from personal experience why I think the term quiet quitting will be very quickly reappropriated by the boss class to basically demean workers and the idea that they want to do the bare minimum or indeed a fair amount for a fair wage. Recently, I was at a festival where they had just an incredible array of these journalists and these famous authors. They were pretty much reading out essays a lot of the time, and they spoke quite often about privilege and how we're beginning to beat it, how the average person is closer and closer to getting that great big platform and getting that great big success that we usually only reserve for the rich. And when I looked out in the audience, I did see that that diversity over the audience looked a lot like the diversity of people who were on stage. Things were starting to look good, except there was one very big difference. The people on stage would talk about their experiences at private schools, at elite colleges, at elite universities, things that the average worker will never have access to. Here's the thing, I was a high school dropout. I really wasn't made for mainstream education, and I like to say I didn't fall through the gaps so much as I was waffle stomped by the higher staff who encouraged me to leave when my grades started to get bad. When I dropped out, I actually did get a job in the media pretty much immediately. I was 15 years old, it was really unusual, and I wanted to be a full reporter. So they actually promised me the next cadetship, but then they were bought out by one of the two corporations that run the entire media here who decided that I needed a degree. So I worked pretty hard on that, kind of trying to talk my way in. I was freelancing in the meantime, and then after many years, I actually did kind of talk my way into a vocational university that began as, a trade college. But they really did well for themselves. They had their own professors and everything. Halfway through that degree, I transferred to an elite university. In fact, at the time, it was the top university in the Southern Hemisphere. Here's what I noticed. Now, working class people, I ran into so many who had done 7 or more unpaid internships. These things run for a minimum of 3 months. They brought so much wisdom, so much intelligence. They worked harder than the people at the elite university, and they had nothing to show for it. Many ended up in call centers. Many ended up doing some marketing, which is nice, but it paid very little, certainly less than what I would need to cover my bare costs of living right now, certainly less than I have gotten as a forklift driver. The fact is, there's still a gate out there. It's made of sandstone and it's guarded by ivy. At the elite university, I'd hang out with media people and comedians as well, and the big question always was, who do we punch down on? And they always came to one conclusion: the rednecks, the bogans, those working people who are associated with ignorance. But one thing didn't cross their minds. Not everyone has access to the Cecil Rhodes Institute of World Domination and Philanthropy. At that vocational university, they networked a lot harder. They spent much more time doing it. And I found it much easier to network with them because I could afford the events they went to. In fact, a lot of them were free. Now, at the elite place, many of them ran over $300 a pop. There were free events, actually. Many times they would feed the students, but on more than one occasion, I went up to them, and people facilitating these events would look me up and down, and I would be turned away. I have to say, though, the majority of the time, they were lovely, they accepted me, and we really found some mutual respect. But I was only ever turned away for being visibly below the poverty line, as many students are at the elite one. Now, in the course of getting into university, I applied for one vocational place that I didn't quite get into. I very much, I wasn't meant to know this, but I really nailed the interview at the end of the process, but they prioritized people who had just finished high school. And a professor at that place has written a brilliant paper, which I will link. It's about the difference between journalism in the 1970s and journalism now. In the 70s, Journalists were much more working class and they networked long into the night at pubs, in bars. These days, they've become more bourgeois. They kind of already have the networks with them, and every night after they've done their hours, they just go home to their families and live quiet, average looking lives. This is why the phrase quiet quitting is going to be reappropriated. Many of the people in that anti-work movement will never be in those rooms with the elite media types, the types who are being groomed for leadership. Without even knowing it, the anti-work movement is not passing the first law of the art of war, which is to meet the other side on a field where you're stronger. See, there's an awful lot of evidence that says the average person in the media is not the average Joe anymore, and they can't be expected to talk for the average person. They don't have the capacity, they don't have the network for it. They have the network for talking to the most prominent people in society. That's their upbringing, that's their background, it's what they know. In short, anti-work has shown up to a class fight armed with empty pockets.